cutting-edge aviation technology and thousands of aircraft on display. Feel the freedom with the whole family. Tickets are free for kids 12 and under, and they'll get inspired by hands-on STEM and aviation activity just for kids. Celebrate America this April in Lakeland, Florida. Get your tickets now at flysnf.org. That's flysnf.org.
Hey everyone, it is Brandy Joy with the Brandy Joy Joyride. Feel free to hop in and have a good time with us every Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. This show is brought to you by One Unit, dedicated to bringing people together, letting your voices be heard. And of course, we're here to entertain you, upbuild you, inspire you, and even hear from you. It's every Thursday. Tune in to 106.1 FM, Brandy Joy Joyride, and we will hear from you and let's have some fun.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
You are about to enter the arena of real news and factual commentary on The Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Now, here is your host for today's program, Ed Golly.
And boy, was I wrong. I never believed the election of Crooked Donald would actually bring the country together as he asserted. But last weekend, I was proven completely wrong when over 8 million Americans came together to protest and assert their disappointment with the wannabe dictator who believes he's America's king. And why do I say that? Well, first of all, he imposed tariffs, which is the sole discretion of Congress. He has no authority to do that. He started a war without the required congressional approval. And he's building monuments to himself all over Washington without congressional approval. So with me in the Tan Talk studio, my two co-hosts, the first attorney and former circuit judge Kevin Carey.
Hello, Ed.
Hello. Also an attorney and our Voice of Reason senior political analyst, Gary Gibbons. Kevin, the Crooked Donald tweeted something out Wednesday morning on his social media account about what's going on with the war over in Iran and the oil situation, which he claims that he foresaw, but it's curious he didn't tell us about that until after the fact. And now he's telling us prices are going to drop rapidly, kind of in the same way that the coronavirus was going to just magically disappear. These prices are going to magically go down. What did he tweet?
Well, at 4/11, as you mentioned, all of these countries, this is Trump, all of those countries that can't get jet fuel because of the Strait of Hormuz, like the United Kingdom, which refused to get involved in the decapitation of Iran. Again, he can't help but, the bitterness. I have a suggestion for you. Number one, buy from the U.S. We have plenty. And number two, build up some delayed courage. Go to the Strait and just take it. Caps, take it. You'll have to start learning how to fight for yourself. The USA won't be there to help you anymore, just like you weren't there for us. Iran has been essentially decimated. The hard part is done. Go get your own oil. President DJT.
Seems to me he doesn't understand the basic structure of NATO. NATO is there to defend member countries that are invaded or attacked by another country. Iran wasn't attacking us. They didn't invade us. So that's why other countries didn't come to our aid, right?
And he didn't tell anybody
that
he was doing it. Only us and Israel knew that this was going to happen. So, but how to win friends and influence people, he's such a statesman.
His Wednesday night speech didn't say anything new that he hasn't said within days of giving the speech. He told us nothing new except, well, the war is won, but we're going to be there a few more weeks. He says that every day.
No, he did say one thing new. He said, the Strait is just going to open up. It just will. Yeah. Just like the coronavirus was going to disappear. The parallels between watching him give those horrible press conferences back during COVID and what he's doing now, it's the same thing. And I was struck by how low energy he was yesterday. Last night, how he used to complain about Jeb Bush being low energy Jeb during the campaign. He was just sort of, reading from the teleprompter and reading his former tweets, and he gave absolutely nothing new. And he, it's like his favorite thing to say is like nobody's ever seen before. And after a while, it just rings so hollow that people say, this is like nothing we've ever seen before. Nobody's ever been this stupid before.
Well, he's a desperate man. He's a beaten down man. He's soon to be a lame duck president. It's just going to get worse. Beyond the fact that he's suggesting war crimes by blowing up these desalination plants and energy plants, those are all war crimes. And Iran still has highly enriched uranium. He seems to have this perception, which did not happen back a few months ago, that they had destroyed all that. They still have quite a bit of that. So it's going nowhere. He also made a passing reference to the economy, which is what people care about. They don't want to go to war and be spending over $1 billion a day on this needless, unprovoked war. And he continues to suggest that there's really not a big economic problem, and that the gas prices, which are now in Florida, about $4.20 cash for gas, it will go away in a few weeks.
So what I don't understand is when they were bombed last year, we were told their nuclear capability with respect to building a bomb was completely and totally decimated. Now he's saying, well, they were on the verge of having this weapon. And the other thing I don't understand is if drones can be shot down by the dozens, why wouldn't you be able to shoot down a missile carrying a nuclear warhead? That'd be even a bigger target, wouldn't it? It'd be easier to destroy that. And a nuclear bomb is a pretty complicated device. It's not like a conventional bomb that when it hits the ground, it detonates. It has to be internally detonated, typically above the ground, so it does more damage. But if that thing is hit before that happens, then it's not going to go off, right? It's just going to land on the ground, make a mess. So why did we actually go in? And I still go back to what I've been saying ever since this started. He's trying to divert attention from the Epstein files, and has been successful because nobody else is talking about that.
Well, it's the ultimate cynicism, and I agree, Ed. I mean, there's a reason no other president went in to attack Iran. Iran has been, and you mentioned on last week's show, the long history and relationship we've had with Iran, but there was no reason to go in now. It was unprovoked. It's a horribly unpopular war. I want to say something. I grew up. My sixth grade life was my father was in Vietnam, getting shot at, and literally we did not know whether my father would come back alive. He had 156 combat missions. This coward who lied to avoid the military, he has no idea what war entails. None. And Hegseth has no idea, and they have no idea what this entails. These are people that have already died unnecessarily. He's got no plan. So the public, beyond this being unpopular, it's completely unnecessary. And it's just a tragedy that people are going to lose their lives over this mistake.
And what we're seeing is that the nature of warfare has really changed a lot. That, you can remember when Russia attacked Ukraine, Putin said the same thing that Trump did, which was this war is going to last 2 to 3 weeks at the most, because they thought that they could go in and immediately seize Kyiv. And what happened instead was, whenever your actual existence is at stake, they figure out ways to this drone warfare is the thing that Ukraine relied upon to defend itself, and it's been very effective. And did we ask Ukraine for any help before we decided to go into Iran? We knew that Iran was providing the drones for Russia, and we knew that they had a lot of drone warfare that they were pretty good at. And don't you think that we would ask somebody who's had to defend that for the last 4 years of the best way to deal with that? And Zelensky has actually offered and is still offering that. And because Trump has this, hatred for Zelensky, he doesn't want to accept that help. And we're just shooting ourselves in the foot by not doing that. It's so typical of what this administration does. They have a grudge against somebody, and then they won't think or pivot to do something different than, I got to hate this person.
Well, and what he says and what he does are two different things. He's talking about, this being a 2 or 3 week war. He's escalating it. He's got troops going in there. He's got the aircraft carriers there. So what he's doing, what he's saying are two different things.
I also think that he truly believed that because of how successful the extraction of Maduro was in Venezuela, that they could do the same thing in Iran, which is completely apples and oranges. And anybody that had war gamed that scenario out in the Middle East knew that this was what was going to happen, that it was going to create a huge economic disaster for the economy worldwide, and it has.
And you think about what's also pathetic and sad is, think about if you'd use these resources to help Ukraine. We could have gone in here. We're allowing Ukraine to get beat up by the bully of Russia. We could have used those resources to help them, an ally who we should be helping to keep democracy, fighting against illegal war started also unprovoked, similar to what we did in Iran. What Russia did was unprovoked with Ukraine. We could have used those resources to end that Ukraine war.
I wonder frequently why, when Trump says that war never would have started if he'd been president, well, why doesn't he do now what he would have done then, but when that war started, and then bring it to an end? He has no earthly idea how to do that.
And if the strait is so easy to take, just take it. Why haven't we taken it? Because he knows that that's, easier said than done.
And now an item in the Wall Street Journal reports that Trump has told aides that he's willing to end the military campaign against Iran, even if the Strait of Hormuz remains largely closed. He's just going to walk away and leave this mess. Economist Paul Krugman noted that this is essentially an admission of defeat. And Suzanne Maloney is the vice president of the Brookings Institution think tank and an expert on Iran. She called his suggestion that he's willing to leave the strait closed unbelievably irresponsible. Having started a war, she said, the U.S. and Israel cannot walk away from the outcome. She told reporters at the Wall Street Journal this, quote, "Energy markets are inherently global, and there is no possibility of insulating the U.S. from the economic damage that's already occurring and will become exponentially worse." And that's the operative word, exponentially worse, if the closure of the strait continues. And this seems to be what Trump doesn't understand when he says, oh, we have plenty of oil. We drill and produce more than we use. Why are prices going up? Because he doesn't understand the interconnection of our oil supply with the rest of the world market. And since he doesn't understand that, he thinks, well, everybody else can pay higher prices. I don't care what happens to the rest of the world. We're going to continue to have cheap oil because we can drill it so much, but it doesn't work that way. No. And apparently nobody's capable of explaining that to him, or he's not capable of understanding it when they try to.
Well, he's got incompetent people around him. It's just incompetency. And you're dealing with war. You're dealing with which, as you've mentioned, Gary, he's created. He's created this. This wasn't the case before. He's created a worldwide, global economic crisis, all on him. And he can say what he wants to say in these. And I agree with you. He seemed like a beaten puppy to me yesterday. He wasn't even his usual bloviate himself. But it's going to get worse. It's not going to get any better. And the ones I think should be worried about are these people trying to get reelected in November, when they're going to be in serious trouble.
The Laura Ingraham actually said it out loud this week on Fox. She said that, did anybody explain it to Trump? And more importantly, was he capable of understanding what they said to him? So, that the MAGA coalition is starting to sever if you get people like Laura Ingraham that are questioning his competency to handle this war.
Well, with the actions that he's taking are contrary to the MAGA policies, which is, for example, you don't start these wars in the Mideast. This is 180 from what Trump was saying when he ran for office.
And, Trump has throughout both his first term and this term, he's pushed Europe and all of our traditional allies away. And he has embraced new allies in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, all these places are now his new buddies. Well, guess what? They don't want him to cut and run. They're getting bombed by Iran with, missiles attacking their oil fields and all the things that were predicted if this happened. And now they're saying, what? Oh, we thought you were our new friend, and now you're cutting and running on us. So he's even alienating our newest allies.
And I heard a report that asserted Iran still has 2/3 of its missile strike capability intact. It hadn't all been destroyed.
No, they've hidden a bunch of the stuff underground, and it can't be reached by these, penetrating bombs that we have.
Well, they don't understand either, though. These drones, which are cheap, they don't cost virtually anything, are very effective at blowing up. They've blown up helicopters. These United States helicopters worth $30 million a shot. And so I don't know who was sitting down, as you mentioned, Gary, and trying to war game this beforehand. But these drones can keep this war going for a long, long time at a very cheap cost.
And the fast boats that they put in the strait as well, that deliver these drones and other weapons to attack these ships that are sitting out there. All these countries and shippers, they're not moving anywhere. They don't want to go through there without permission or without paying a fine to Iran, which is what's crazy is that Trump is allowing Iran to dictate what the terms are of who can pass through the strait and who can't. Chinese, they're getting their oil. And other countries are getting oil, in fact, some was delivered to Cuba. So, one day he says one thing, another day he says something else. And so if you're an ally or if you're an American that are saying, what's going to happen, you can't figure it out because he's so erratic.
Well, and the other problem with being a bully and autocrat, which is what he is, there's no bipartisan discussion about how to address these complex issues. And it's just going to get worse there, as I mentioned, with no end game. For him to say, well, it's going to go away in 2 to 3 weeks. There is a more hardline regime in Iran now than there was before this happened because the son is in there and he's even more pissed off at the United States.
Yeah, it killed his dad, his
Absolutely.
mom, and his siblings.
So to the extent there's this garbage comment about regime change, it's for an even harder line, hateful country now. The history of Iran made it very clear this was nowhere near Venezuela, if that's what his thought process was.
What's really bizarre about all of this is that he's trying to renegotiate the same deal, essentially, that Barack Obama put together in 2015. He tore it all up, and now we're starting over again. Obama reached an agreement with Tehran with the help of some of our then European allies and China and Russia. They were all mixed up in this thing. It was called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and it imposed stringent restrictions on Iran's nuclear activities. You remember that? They had the inspections?
Yeah, they had inspectors.
That was part of it, yep, by the International Atomic Energy Agency. And even though Obama acknowledged that the deal didn't resolve all our problems with Iran, he argued that the only alternative was a major Middle East war. And so for several years, that plan was successful in limiting Iran's uranium enrichment. But along came Crooked Donald, and he withdrew from it in 2018, insisting he'd force Tehran to sign a more stringent deal, which he failed at. In fact, he angered the regime and accelerated its enrichment program. So, we had a deal. Everything was fine. It wasn't broke. So he fixed it. And now here's where we are. And we don't know where we're going to end up.
And the two times that they were trying to negotiate this, first last June, they were negotiating and he bombed them without warning during the middle of those negotiations. And again, he sends over Witkoff and Jared before this war started, and they're in negotiations and he starts the war. So they're saying, we can't believe a word that's coming out of these so-called negotiators' mouths that you're sending over here. We won't meet with them again. So, that, the diplomacy has never been his strong suit. And, why wouldn't you send somebody like Marco, who's supposed to be the one that is in charge of our foreign policy?
I think he's the Secretary of State last I checked, right? He should be doing that.
So much for being the world's greatest deal maker, right?
Well, Trump is playing this dance with the financial markets, where the markets, which went down, by the way, after the speech last night, they were not at all, mollified by what he had to say. But it's a dance where he says, well, things are getting worse, and we're putting more resources. We're spending over $1 billion a day. And he said, well, it's going to be over in 10 minutes. And the market, so he's got this dance with the markets, but number one, it destabilizes the markets because it's up and down. And it's just not moving anything forward. And I don't know why he thinks that somehow the markets are going to be bettered by one, the huge debt we're going into, which is just furthered, and the unstableness and the oil issues, Gary, you mentioned, and just the crisis. This is now a crisis. That's the bottom line.
I think so. And it's actually probably a little worse than that for him, because of where it can potentially lead. I mean, he may be delusional about what he thinks is going to happen in the November midterms, but I think he's probably catching on. I mean, he still thinks he's the most popular president in history. But let's hear what James Carville says about where he may stand with respect to those issues.
You're getting ready to get the living crap kicked out of you. You don't know because they haven't really told you. And let me tell you something. They're going to start breaking the news to you kind of gently, and you're going to sit there and wonder what it feels like to be punched in the mouth by Mike Tyson. But you won't know, because it's quite one thing to imagine what it's like to get punched in the mouth by Mike Tyson. It's another thing to actually get punched in the mouth by Mike Tyson. And that's what's going to happen to you in November. Let's talk about your future, your post-November future. First, people are not going to return your phone calls. They're going to correctly think you yesterday. Yeah, they'll say, well, he's got 2 years left. He can do damage. No one gives a about him. The Democrats are going to investigate you to no end. I would like to introduce you to Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, D. Rhode Island. By the way, Congressman Jefferson and Senator Schumer, they're going to go down to the White House on November 10th, and then you're going to have some stiff photo of them sitting there talking about collegiality and cooperation. Believe that bull. Then they're going to start going after you. Then they're going to start figuring out where all the money stolen is. Then they're going to go after you stupid jackass kids and their spouses and all the other bull that you see. And they're going to investigate the shit out of you.
He speaketh the truth, Ed, and I can't wait. This is as much as this has been such a nightmare, not just because Democrats were unhappy with this clown in the White House, but with all the harm it's causing to death and whatnot. But this is going to happen, and Carville, people minimize him to some degree because he tends to be a little bit emotional, but he's a smart person. He's always made the comment about it's the economy stupid. That's the main problem he's got. He's got a horrible economic situation. He's got still the Epstein ethical probe going on, and now you've got this war, which is creating a global crisis.
So you think his crystal ball is pretty accurate?
I think so. I mean, you shortchange Carville, you're going to make a mistake.
Well, in the second hour of our program today, we're going to talk a little bit about conservative values. They tend to look good on paper, but in the real world where they're implemented, maybe not so much. And also what the Democratic Party has had to offer this country over the past 100 years. So I hope you'll stay with us for that. Maybe we can break up a few of the urban legends about the Democratic Party that seem to be constantly imposed on us. You're listening to the Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. I'm your host, Ed Golly. My co-hosts are attorney and former circuit judge Kevin Carey, along with attorney Gary Gibbons. And we're going to take a short time out. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the legal cases that we're dealing with these days and put them in layman's terms so the rest of us can understand it, along with more of the issues that the conservatives never want you to hear about.
Are you a writer, inventor? Do you have questions about your intellectual property rights? Well, tune in every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 11 o'clock for Joy on Paper. Once a month, I will have a special guest, the writer's legal eagle, Bill Larson of Larson & Larson, who can answer your questions. Protect your valuable work. Email me your questions to patsy.radio@gmail.com and then listen in every Tuesday and Thursday at 11 a.m. right here on Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network. That's patsy.radio@gmail.com.
You're listening to the Voice of Reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Tune in to the Shrink and Wrap Show here on Tan Talk Radio. Our stories and our topics will include, but are not limited to, everyday issues. We're here for you, for our listeners. We want to know what's important to you. So again, don't miss us on Tan Talk Radio. Tune in again, Shrink and Wrap Show. We'll see you then.
The Shrink and Wrap Show at its new time, Thursdays from 4 to 5 p.m. here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. And now it's time for the Only a Conservative Could Think It Minute with your host, Ed Golly.
Whiskey Pete Hegseth has no shame. The defense secretary last week asked the White House to approve a staggering $200 billion request to Congress to fund the war in Iran. That's on top of the $1.5 trillion defense budget he's seeking for the next fiscal year, about 50% more than the Pentagon was allocated last year. The Iran request has been met with skepticism from both parties. Representative Lauren Boebert said she won't send more tax dollars to the industrial war complex while, quote, I have folks in Colorado who can't afford to live, unquote. With the conflict costing the U.S. about $1.3 million a minute, it would take only 3 weeks of war funding to restore health insurance subsidies that the crooked Donald administration let expire last year, or to create a nationwide pre-K program for 3- and 4-year-olds. But the Trump administration would rather drop bombs than get people health care or education. Think about that.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
Well, Barbie Nome is making the kind of news that she'd really rather not be recognized for. Or should we say that applies to her husband? Because by now, most of us have probably seen the picture. Yeah. Well, let's let the staff from The Daily Show explain.
Let's kick things off with Kristi Noem, former Secretary of Homeland Security, and the inciting incident in All Dogs Go to Heaven. She's had a bad time recently. She lost her job. We found out about her affair and how it happened on a taxpayer-funded plane. She really needs to just lay low and stay out of the headlines. Sorry, what's that?
Former Homeland Security Chief Kristi Noem is said to be stunned by reports that her husband may be leading a cross-dressing double life.
According to the Daily Mail, Noem's 56-year-old husband, Brian, is a secret cross-dresser who wears gigantic fake boobs and wears pink hot pants while he chats online with fetish models who have gigantic breasts.
I can't believe the lady banging her employee on a plane is the less messy one in their marriage. You know what? You live your truth, Brian. Oh, she can dress up and you can't? That. You know what? If she had an affair, you have a free pass. You can do whatever you want. I support you and your beautiful lazy-eyed balloon nipples. No, truly, I have never felt more seen. You know what they say, sometimes they're sisters, not twins.
That's just awful. That's just ugly. I tell you what, she may not be making many more ads. She can probably lay low for a while after that.
You know, if you wrote that as fiction, you would say, no, there's no way. I would not believe that as reality.
I can't give you an argument. It's terrible. But anyway, and
the one who's supposed to be in charge of keeping us safe had no idea whatsoever that he was doing this.
On in her own back bedroom. Unreal. Well, let's take a look now at some of these court cases that are going on. Members of the Supreme Court expressed skepticism Wednesday about the lawfulness of Crooked Donald's proposal to limit the constitutional guarantee of birthright citizenship for people born on U.S. soil. So the argument is things have changed since, what is it, the 14th Amendment, is it?
Correct.
That allows that. Because back then, there was no such thing as an anchor baby. People didn't come here just to have children, and then they became citizens and they could stay. And so the argument from the Trump administration is things are different now, and we should accommodate the changing times. But the judge says, well, but the Constitution hasn't changed.
Well, what happened yesterday, Ed, was incredible. And there's so much chaos with this president that any one thing, sometimes any one item or agenda can get lost in the muddle. But I think it's important we spend a few minutes talking about what happened yesterday, because it was incredible. First, you had Trump marching down to the Supreme Court to listen. And I heard that Bonnie was with him as well. But even though there are no cameras in the federal court cases, there is audio. And I would suggest to our listeners on radio or our viewers on YouTube to listen. You can easily, and what you'd hear is just incredible. You have these justices who Trump appointed, who Trump necessarily thought should be in his pocket, which he personally criticized when he lost the tariff case, about a month ago, listening to these conservative, let alone the liberal judges, just browbeat John Sauer, who's the Solicitor General. And I don't know if you've spent much time listening to John Sauer. It's interesting. He's kind of hard to listen to. He's got some issues with his voice, which is not. But
sounds like RFK Jr. in a way.
Yeah. But he makes these frivolous arguments, and you made the point about he was saying about this is a new world. And John Roberts, who's the Chief Justice, Republican appointed, says it may be a new world, but it's the same Constitution, and that may be the line of the day. But Cecilia Wong, who was a lawyer for the ACLU, again, you wouldn't normally think these judges who were mostly Republican, the 6-3 majority would be that supportive of an ACLU argument. But there is no way in the world that Trump is going to get 5 votes based upon this oral argument. You had Gorsuch, Roberts, as I mentioned, Kavanaugh, and Coney Barrett. Let me make another comment. Coney Barrett is right now the most influential justice on that court. If you analyze these past years' opinions, she is the one who most coincides with majority opinion. And again, I can't do it justice by just talking about it, but I would suggest, and it's very easy to track down some of these comments. It was almost comical. And at one point, Trump just walked out, and just what he did in the second E. Jean Carroll case in the middle of closing arguments, he just got up and walked out like a bully that he is, a schoolboy that's not getting his way. And then he has a gall today to call the Supreme Court a kangaroo court. Complete utter disregard, nothing that a president should be saying. But I think I think number one, he's going to lose on this. Number one, this should not have been done by executive order. This is in, as you mentioned, Ed, the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. And it's clear there have been cases from 1868, 1898 supporting this. And number two, even if you try to do it by statute, which he didn't do, it would not be able to be done. You'd have to go the third road, which is to amend the Constitution, which is hard as hell to do. And of course, he's never going to, he doesn't have the energy or commitment to ever do that. He thinks he can rule via Steve Miller by executive order, like he's some king, but he can't. He's going to lose on this. I think the only 2 votes he'll probably get are, Thomas and Alito. That I don't think there's anything this president would do that would bother those two. I mean, the tariff should have been a 9-0 decision. I mean, that was not a 9-0 is absurd. So there is a line here. We've talked a lot in the past about what's going to happen with the Supreme Court. There is a line, and it's clear when these are completely frivolous cases. And Gary, I think you said this before we came on, they should not have even taken this case.
Right.
It was such a frivolous case.
Yeah, and I don't think they would have taken it if Biden had been, the president. because the lower courts resoundingly said, no, this is a ridiculous argument. On the face of the 14th Amendment, it says that if you're born here, you're a citizen. And the courts have reaffirmed that over and over. And they tried to make some hay out of the word domicile that appeared in a like 1890 decision that the Supreme Court had, and it went nowhere. But they were really trying to create another class of citizens because they said that in the executive order, it was only going to apply to people that, born 30 days after the effective date of his executive order. And so Justice Jackson said, well, how is this going to work? Do you have to take your if you're the parents, do you have to take your papers to the delivery room and show them to the doctor and say that, you're going to be we're actually citizens here, and so this child is a citizen? It's just completely crazy. And none of the cases had ever focused on the parents. They had always focused on the child who, that the child is here and he's born here. That's it. You're a citizen. And it's been that way 150 years. And it's going to continue to be that way because he's going to lose. He couldn't wait to leave because he went back. The first thing he did was get on his Twitter account and start, saying what a stupid country we are. We're the only country in the world stupid enough to do this. Well, there are at least 30 others that have birthright citizenship too. So,
well, there's even some racist overtones to this because, this came out way back when, part of in the context of slavery.
Mm-hmm.
There were some racial undertones to this, which is not uncommon for Trump either. Because I do think he's racist. He's got the dog whistle he likes to send out there. But secondly, there was this argument by Sauer that seemed to be, all these planes people are waiting to fly into the United States just to have their babies here. And these are all these horrible illegal aliens who all of a sudden these children, are now citizens, and somehow this is all wrong. But the liberal justices did not have to do much of anything because the heavy lifting was being done by these purported conservative justices. And Justice Jackson, I firmly believe that when Roberts retires and there's a Democratic president, she could well be the next Chief Justice. She's a very impressive justice.
She's the sharpest one on that bench.
She really is.
I didn't know they could move up within the court.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Is that right? I
Yes.
thought he would just appoint a new one. I've always thought that the senior judge, whoever's been on the longest, should move into that position when the vacancy comes up. But
Roberts, they brought someone in who had never been on the Supreme Court. All of a sudden, he's the Chief Justice over the other eight. But no, the president can do it either way.
There's a saying that we're hearing these days that not all Republicans are racists, but all racists are Republicans. And I think you're right, Kevin, that's really the foundation of this.
Oh, this was part of the immigration policy. And this was signed on the first day, was one of the litany of executive orders that he signed. And it was to try to make it easier to deport children. If the parents are undocumented, it's clear that they were a target. But he said, I don't want this child that was born here to have rights that complicate the immigration process. So,
and you can see what he did with the Dreamers too. I mean, he's antagonistic toward the people the children have been here under the Biden administration, given opportunities to stay here. They did nothing wrong, and these are productive people. We need to keep reminding our audience that all of this battle is based upon this false premise that there are all these violent immigrants coming in, raping and killing people, which is just not true. It's just not true. So the immigration policies that we've had have worked. Now, can there be changes made to tighten the border? Sure. But that's not what's happening now. This is all just really wasted time on frivolous action, whether it's tariffs, whether it's this. These are clearly, as lawyers, Gary, if a client brought these came to our office, we would say, look, the clear statute, the clear Constitution says this is not the case. And they got caught up in this language about subject to the jurisdiction, and which has been argued before. I love how conservatives say stare decisis, which means you honor past cases, which you've talked about it. They lied when these judges went before the Senate and said they would honor it, and then they right away reversed Roe v. Wade. But they should have honored the fact these conservatives purportedly would honor that this is what the law is. And it's unstable, according to conservatives, to bounce the law around. You've got to have precedent, and you have this stare decisis concept. And they don't, with Trump, they don't care about that. And again, it screams for these Republicans who know better. They're smart Republicans who know that this is contrary to what the Constitution says and that this is all just a waste of time. But they fear this man. And I really feel sorry for Trump, again, when he becomes a lame duck in a few months, when they don't fear him anymore. They won't fear. He governs out of fear right now.
Even when he wasn't in power, he controlled the party. That's what was so amazing to me. He dictated who the candidates would be. And he's not trying to limit his control over who is a citizen, but also who gets to vote. He's trying to exert control over our election system. He signed an executive order on Tuesday that aims to create federal lists of citizens and ask the U.S. Postal Service to transmit mail ballots to only those people.
And put a special barcode on that. You know, again, our election systems are handled by the states. We know what we're doing. We don't have problems with our elections, and he's trying to muck it up and trying to get control over it just so that they can tell certain people you can't vote.
Mm-hmm. And again, it's contrary to the conservative concept of states' rights, which you mentioned. The conservative approach over the years was federal government. You stay out of our lives, and you delegate this. The power is to the states. What's not enunciated for the federal government is left with the states. So all this is 180 from conservative doctrine, and maybe no one cares, but we're not going to ignore it. It's certainly the truth.
Yeah, and there was a report this week of a guy that I think he was in Wisconsin that had tried to demonstrate how corrupt the system was, and he requested mail-in ballots for other people. He impersonated them. Guess what? He's in jail because that turns out that that's a crime and that is going to be prosecuted. And they found out that he was stealing identities and trying to do this. He tried to prove that there was some sort of fraud in the system by, guess what, committing fraud. So, if you have to go that far to try to prove that something exists that doesn't, there's a problem.
Well, and then, the SAVE Act, the federal legislation is going to go nowhere. I'm not sure why they're still wasting time on that. It's not going to get through the Senate. And so that's a problem. So Trump keeps spinning his wheels on these issues that are not going to go anywhere. There's nothing that's happening with him in this administration that's helping us. Nothing. He's not addressing the issues that we care about: affordability, property taxes, the issue about insurance. None of the issues we care about are being addressed, and they're going to pay a heavy price for this in November. I know I keep saying that week after week, but it's just getting worse.
Which tells me that he's going to pull out all stops to try to rig the election in November. And this is one of those issues where he can decide who doesn't get to vote, what citizens don't get to vote because they aren't voting the right way. He is so desperate to keep control of Congress because he knows they're going to start impeaching him every week because of all the crimes he's committed against this country. So there's just no telling how far he's going to go. And I wouldn't put it past him to send in his ICE Gestapo goons to seize voting machines. We saw what happened in Fulton County. We saw how he tried to rig the election in Georgia. He sent a mob to overthrow the government on January 6th. And instead of going to prison where he belongs, he ends up back in the White House. What the hell's going on here?
Well, there's no question that I think if he understands that if there is an attempt made to minimize the vote, there's going to be a big blue wave in November. The House, which is now just 2 or 3, they talked about 15. There's now talk about a 40-person change in the House, and there's a record number of Republicans who have decided not to run. They see the buzzsaw coming, and then you look at and what Trump has done, and I go back to Georgia. He's the reason Georgia has 2 Democratic senators because when there were those 2 runoffs in January of 2021, he was telling Republicans not to vote because it's rigged. So thank you very much, and I think they're both going to continue to be in office. They both already won re-election, and I think the other one, Ossoff, will now. But what you got in the Senate, just quickly, I thought there was no chance about 8 months ago of the Senate turning Democrat, because they would need 4 changeovers. That is, if you look at the polls now, Maine, North Carolina is a given. Maine Collins is losing to both Democrats. I think it's going to be the male. There's the governor of Maine is running, but I think she's going to lose to I don't know I forget the gentleman's name, but Collins is losing. In Alaska, the incumbent is losing in the polls. Ohio, Sherrod Brown, who was a senator in the other seat and lost that, and is going against someone who was never elected, was appointed, when Vance became vice president. The polls are showing that Ohio, the Democrat is now winning. Texas, I think Trump has screwed up, Texas too. You're going to have the much more the unpopular, your buddy Paxton, who, but for the fact that he was paying off some people in the Senate, would have been convicted. People don't talk much about that. He was impeached, and we've talked about that. But there's some hanky-panky which went off with the Senate. There was some action taken that was not appropriate to get that Senate to back off him. But he's a criminal. So run him against this Democrat who was running a very smart campaign in Texas. And then you've got Iowa's in play. All of a sudden, thanks to Trump's complete incompetence and corruption, the Senate is very much in play if you look at the numbers.
Wow. Speaking of corruption, the way to avoid being prosecuted is to fire any FBI agent that is involved in the prosecution of the crime. Well, on Tuesday, 3 fired FBI agents sued Kash Patel on behalf of a proposed class of all FBI employees who have been dismissed or even could be in the future for political reasons, something I doubt we've ever seen in this country. We see that in authoritarian countries, but we've never seen it here. That lawsuit represented one of the broadest efforts to date to seek accountability against Patel and crooked Attorney General Pam Bondi for getting rid of FBI employees who have run afoul of crooked Donald and his allies. So each of the agents who brought the suit served on a public corruption squad at the FBI's Washington field office that investigated the convicted felon Trump's expansive efforts to cling to power after losing the 2020 election. And then that inquiry, you'll recall, was taken over by special counsel Jack Smith, who eventually dropped it, all the conspiracy charges, of which I'm convinced Trump was guilty after he was reelected. The 3 agents were all fired last fall because of their work on Smith's election interference case, despite their years of exemplary and unblemished service in the FBI. Even people who in that agency specialize in trying to protect us from terrorist attacks, Trump doesn't care. Get rid of them. Even if they were just appointed to those positions, they didn't come up and say, gee, I don't like Trump. I'd like to be on the group that's prosecuting him. They were simply appointed to investigate the evidence. And as a result, they've been fired. So we're seeing a loyalist FBI, which is an invitation for corruption. And at the same time, all the inspectors general have been fired. Well, Trump turns around and says, well, I'm going to put Vance in charge of investigating corruption.
Well, you're right. You're right. This is something that would happen in the Soviet Union, in Hungary. This is number one, as you mentioned, Ed, there was crime here. It's like there was something wrong. It's like when you pay Flynn $1.2 million for pleading guilty for felony conduct. It just makes no sense. These were the FBI was investigating and the Department of Justice investigating criminal activity, and I have no doubt that there would be a conviction that came out of that with Smith, et cetera. But what's happened now that they've gutted, as you mentioned, FBI, they've gutted the DOJ. If you look, they're not bringing white collar crime cases. They're way down. So and it's occurring in this country. The crime hasn't stopped. In fact, with this criminal in the White House, it's gotten worse. But what's happening is all this crime is being committed and not being addressed by the FBI or by the Department of Justice.
They're chasing all of these lawsuits involving the executive orders that are overturned. They immediately appeal everything, and whether it's frivolous or not, they continue to do that. And the brain drain that we've had in the FBI and all of our intelligence agencies is frightening, because we've gotten rid of people that have decades of experience in how to investigate things, how to make sure that we are being kept safe from attacks from terrorists and others. So the fact that is okay, and people aren't screaming from the rooftops, Republicans especially, who claim to be the party of law and order. Why are you, allowing all of this brain drain to happen? And none of these people are given the opportunity to have their hearing, as to why they're being fired, right, which again goes against all of the laws that we have that say that you're entitled to defend yourself and to show that this is just being done for political purposes.
I think that's a very strong case, that class action you just mentioned. I think they're going to win that case.
And the deputy attorney general is a guy named Todd Blanche. Right? You kind of know him. He's the one that went down and interviewed
our good friend Maxwell.
Yes. So he, over the weekend, was at the CPAC convention, which we'll talk about in the second hour of the program. The lawsuit points out that he said during an appearance at that event that Mr. Patel had cleaned house at the FBI. He said this literally, quote, "There isn't a single man or woman with a gun, federal agent, still in that organization that had anything to do with the prosecution of President Trump," unquote. So we can see exactly what they're aiming at. It's a loyalty oath that they want everybody to take. It goes all the way back to the first time he had the FBI director, Comey, come into the White House. He, being Trump, invited him into dinner and said, "Now I want you to profess loyalty to me, not the Constitution." And Comey wouldn't do it and became a perpetual Trump enemy, right? Because he did what he, or I should say, because Comey took the position that he would stand by his oath of office and work for the country and not for a dictator wannabe.
Yeah, and all of the people that formerly worked for the FBI that are on TV that talk about the way it works, I said, you don't get a chance to say, "Oh, I don't want to work on that case." You're assigned to work on the case and you work on it. That's the way it is. That's what you signed up to do. And so now, because they were assigned to do that, now there's a litmus test to say, "Oh, well, you worked on something that, found that the president actually committed crimes." And thank God for Eileen Cannon, we were able to get that dismissed so that it'll never see the light of day. But there were crimes there, folks, and
that's
they
the irony
shouldn't
of this.
be fired for doing something that they had no control over working on.
This is so antithetical to democracy, Gary. You're exactly right. There would have been convictions. This is not as if they did something wrong. They did their job. It wasn't as if, gosh, you shouldn't have done this. There's no defense about, well, you should have independently decided this was not a good idea. But you're right. What's happened is it's been a complete brain drain, affecting thousands of people. And again, conservatives who are we got to arrest these criminals. Are you okay with the fact now that all these criminals, white collar criminals, are just going out there committing crimes and it's not being addressed at all by the Department of Justice? That's what's happening.
Or they're being pardoned.
Or pardoned.
The ones that have been convicted are being pardoned without any kind of investigation as to why they should be pardoned.
And on top of that, they're also bringing frivolous criminal claims against folks that should not be brought, and they're being thrown out in court as jokes. So all you look at the board, everything they're doing is completely wrong. All of it. And again, there are times I've had MAGA people say, "Well, you're so upset about this." Objectively speaking, we've never seen this type of corruption in government, and so we've got to pay attention to it.
Yeah, Liz Oyer, that we often play her audio clips on this show, the former pardon attorney, she said, the first thing that happens when somebody files a request for a pardon, it used to be that they would refer them to the FBI and they would do a complete background check on them to see whether or not they're, for example, committing crimes now. Because that's happened with a lot of these people that have been, a lot of the January 6th defendants have been continuing to commit crimes after they were pardoned again.
Serious crimes.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you stay with us here on The Voice of Reason, because in the second hour, we're going to take a look at the fundamental values of conservatism. They look pretty spectacular on paper, but how well do they actually work when applied these days? And what's the Democratic Party done for this country besides run up debt? Well, we'll tell you all about it in the second hour of The Voice of Reason. That and more of the issues that the conservatives never want you to hear about.
WTAN, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
Listen.
This is CBS News on the Hour, your home for original reporting.
I'm Deborah Rodriguez. The four-person crew of the Artemis II woke up to the sounds of Young and Six Sleepyhead, then wasted no time getting down to business in their first full day of what they hope will be a historic mission around the far side of the moon. Correspondent Mark Strassman is at Kennedy Space Center.
They're especially focused on testing the life support systems. Without that, obviously, you've got major problems, but they need a series of systems checks and tests to convince NASA that they are safe now to make the push for the moon.
Last night, President Trump told the American people the administration's objectives in the Iran war have already been met or exceeded. He also said the U.S. will continue to hit hard for another few weeks. CBS's Holly Williams has gotten reaction from Iran.
That Iranian spokesman claimed that the US and Israel have not destroyed Iran's missile production centers, long-range attack drones, and advanced air defense systems, asserting that they are in locations that the US and Israel cannot reach.
Lawmakers in the House convened for 2 minutes today, but took no action to pass a bipartisan funding deal to reopen DHS operations.
In a joint statement, House Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune said they have agreed on a plan to fully fund the Department of Homeland Security, except for ICE and Customs and U.S. Border Patrol. Republicans will try to fund those agencies later through reconciliation, which they could do without Senate Democrats, who are demanding reforms to immigration enforcement. The Senate could vote on the deal as early as today. The House is in recess until April 13th. Michael Wallace, CBS News.
DNA testing has linked another murder, this one in Utah, to serial killer Ted Bundy. CBS's Matt Gutman.
One of his victims was Laura Ann Amy. She disappeared in 1974 after a Halloween party. About a month later, the 17-year-old's bound and beaten body was discovered on the side of a highway. Investigators have long suspected Bundy was responsible for her death, and now, more than 50 years later, they can prove it.
We now have definitive evidence proving that Theodore Ted Bundy murdered Laura, and we can announce that this case is officially closed.
This is Holy Thursday. Pope Leo celebrating Mass of the Last Supper at the Basilica of St. John the Lateran in Rome. The Pope will also wash the feet of 12 people in a reenactment of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. Oil prices soar 13%, Dow's down 507. This is CBS News.
The stars shine brighter on CBS Mornings. This is a slam dunk.
So cute.
Gail came in singing for me today.
On CBS Mornings.
I'm Bob Burke, founder and chairman of Burke America Parts Group, a family of brands that includes repair clinics.
Sun and Fun is celebrating the red, white, and blue at 52. Join us this April 14th through the 19th as we celebrate America's 250th birthday and 52 years of epic events at Sun and Fun. With the iconic U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds taking over the skies, live country music by Cooper Allen and Thomas Mack.
This ain't her first rodeo.
Day and night air shows, cutting-edge aviation technology, and thousands of aircraft on display. Feel the freedom with the whole family. Tickets are free for kids 12 and under, and they'll get inspired by hands-on STEM and aviation activity just for kids. Celebrate America this April in Lakeland, Florida. Get your tickets now at flysnf.org. That's flysnf.org.
Hey, you new to the area or just want to know about the best hidden gems and upcoming events? Stay tuned. Be Local Buzz with Devin takes you to these places, introduces you to the best businesses, and tells you about upcoming buzz. Preset your radio to Tan Talk 1340 AM or 106.1 FM. That is the Be Local Buzz with Devin on Tan Talk 1340 AM and 106 FM. Looking forward to speaking with you.
It's the Be Local Buzz with Devin, Tuesdays from 4 to 5 p.m.
Hi, this is Trish, your nonprofit host on the Shrink and Wrap Show. Nonprofits are so important in our community, helping families, supporting causes, and creating change where it's needed the most. Join me as I highlight nonprofit events and ways you can get involved and make an impact. Tune in every Thursday from 4 to 5 on Tan Talk Radio. That's 106.1 FM, the Shrink and Wrap Show, because where nonprofits thrive, communities thrive. You don't want to miss it.
Sean W. Scott has been practicing elder
Do you
law.
have questions after being injured in a car accident or injured because of someone's negligence? Do you feel overwhelmed or uncertain about the next steps after being injured in a crash? The personal injury attorneys at Peronic, Caulfield, Averill, and Noyes have been helping their injured clients since 1955 and are now on this radio station to provide guidance to you. Listen to FLA Law each Tuesday from 5 to 6 p.m. Let their decades of experience help you and your family. Offices in Clearwater, non-attorney spokesman.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
Now, the voice of reason continues here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Here again is your host for today's program, Ed Golly.
Along with Gary Gibbons and Kevin Carey, there used to be a show here on the Tan Talk Network called Only in America. The host never really specified what it is he thought could only be done in America. I never understand it when people say that. Other countries allow people to vote. They can start businesses. They have freedom of speech and so on. Apparently, there's something undefined that we can only do in America. But he had a guy on from Sweden or somewhere, and he'd come on and he'd say, "Oh, we can't vote for the Democrats because they run up debt and they tax it to death." And the fact is that the Democrats don't run up all this debt we have, which has now hit $39 trillion. That's our national debt. And it crossed that threshold in just 5 months from when it was $38 trillion. It took our country nearly 2 centuries to accumulate the first $1 trillion in debt, which happened when Reagan was in office because of his tax cuts. The Treasury Department now pays that much to service the debt every year.
Trump bragged last night that this was all about the next 2 generations and our children and grandchildren.
Yeah.
What he's doing is imposing more and more debt on those generations.
So I spotted a column by Marianne Mancuso, who is a member of the Miami Herald editorial board, and it was published Sunday in the paper. And she says this: "I never set out to be a thorn in the side of my political party. When I went to work in the Republican Party, I chose it because I believed in its core values." She lists 4 things: limited government, individual responsibility, fiscal conservatism, and equality of opportunity. Now, that all sounds great until we really look at what happens when those values are implemented. So, for example, limited government means that corporations are more free to pollute, to screw their employees, to sell products that aren't safe, because only government can protect us from corporations. Only the government can do it. It was only last week, I think, that we celebrated the anniversary. That's certainly nothing to celebrate, of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire that happened in 1911, when the fire escapes were locked in a sweatshop factory on the 6th floor of a building in New York. And I think something like 140 people had either died of smoke inhalation or jumping out of the building. Well, the regulations that give us safe working conditions didn't come about because of the companies themselves. Otherwise, they already would have had functional fire escapes in that building. They came about because of more government, not because of less government.
Well, Ed, you need to have regulation because business, the sole function of a corporation is to maximize profit for the shareholders.
Precisely.
So that's not done if you're concerned about safety.
And what about individual responsibility, Gary? What's that a buzzword for? And no help from the government, no SNAP program, no Head Start program, right? No,
Right.
we're not
Pull
gonna
yourself
help
up by your bootstraps, regardless, until it happens to you or your family. And then all of a sudden they want the handout or hand up. The other thing about smaller government means more privatization, and let's give these government functions to corporations. Look at what's happening with the immigration detention centers. Those are all private entities that are running those things, and they're making billions of dollars doing that. And they're being paid a lot of money for each one of the people that they have in detention, and the conditions are deplorable in there. They're not spending the money to make sure that these people are having health care or anything that they need while they're being detained. They're just going to the bank and making huge deposits.
I was listening this morning to the governor of New Jersey, elected last year, and she's pushing back, and she made a point of mentioning that they put in this warehouse there for thousands of detainees and 2 bathrooms. I mean, not at all livable conditions. And so some of these governors who are Democrats, Virginia as well as New Jersey, both recently elected Democratic governors, are pushing back, given in their states, saying we're not going to allow this. This is not right.
Plus, they're overpaying for these warehouses. 2 and 3 times the assessed value of the properties. Who's making out on that? There's so much corruption going on that it's crazy. But that's what happens when you take things that can be done by the government and put a profit margin motive into it and hand it to these corporations who, but for any kind of regulation, they would just do whatever they could for as much greed and profit motives as they could possibly muster.
Well, for years, people said, "Oh, let's make the prisons private. Let's privatize prisons." That's been an utter failure, complete failure. The amount of money, by the way, we spend on prisons in this country is just corrupt. The amount of people we imprison is corrupt, but it just doesn't work.
Do you think that's the foundation behind the efforts to privatize the whole education system? In other words, you could move the largest element of the state budget from a public service into private enterprise.
Oh, absolutely. Look at the voucher system and the way it's been sold as school choice. Well, it's not school choice because the private schools don't have to take everybody. In fact, they can say, we're not going to take this particular kid. And then they set their rates so high that the amount of the voucher that you get doesn't allow your kid to go there. What it does do, however, is for the parents who are able to afford sending their kid to a private school, guess what? It just got subsidized by the taxpayers. And it used to cost you $20,000 a year to send your kid to this private school. Now you're getting 10 from the government, so it only cost you 10. So again, it's rewarding the haves and then trying to sell it to the poor people who think that their kid is going to, the parents who think that they're actually going to have choice in where their kids go. They don't have to take any kids with disabilities. They don't have to take anybody with a learning disability. So, it's just all about greed.
Well, there are 3 serious problems with that. Number 1, you're gutting the public school system because that money's coming from the public schools. 2, and this is consistent with what's happening with the Republicans, what's being taught is very narrow. This is not a public, global, universal system. And 3, there's very little accountability. So it's kind of a lose-lose from our perspective because they're as you say, they're subsidizing folks that don't even need that, and 2, they're not that accountable. So, and as I said, 3, they're being taught what they want to teach. We're going to forget about, slavery, or we don't want white people to feel bad about what happened 200 years ago.
Well, they also, with the education system, and you can thank Jeb Bush for this one. I'll never forgive him for what he drew up on the back of an envelope and said, hey, okay, we're going to give grades to schools, and the ones that are performing the worst, we're going to cut their funding. It should be the opposite. You should try to improve these schools that aren't performing well by sending people in there to make them better. But instead, no, that's just a way to get rid of those schools and give it to a private or a charter school.
And in fact, it's a mandate of the state constitution to provide a high quality public education to everybody.
Yep.
Not just the people who can afford to be subsidized in private schools. What about fiscal conservatism? The scuttlebutt is that the Democrats tax and throw the money away, doing studies of leper frogs or something, and just waste money by the billions of dollars.
More than 3/4 of the deficit that we have accrued in this country have happened under Reagan, Bush, and Trump. And it's all been tied to the tax cuts for the rich. So what we've done is we've taken out a huge credit card, and we've decided that we're going to lower tax rates. We're not going to tax the ultra rich anymore. We used to do that a lot, but now we don't do that at all. And then we've changed it so that we don't tax any of their savings or any of their wealth. And so as a result, what we have to do is go borrow the money to run the government, and it's just increased that deficit over and over and over.
But the conservatives insist that if we cut taxes, it generates more revenue.
Oh, the trickle down theory.
It puts more money in the pockets of the taxpayer to spend, which then gets circulated and then gets taxed, and then the tax revenues go up. They never tell us exactly where the break-even point is, because obviously if we taxed 0.5%, we'd go broke. but they always say that, or they insist that lowering taxes increases revenue, in spite of the fact that, as you just pointed out, historically, every time we've had these significant tax cuts, we've seen revenue decrease and deficits increase.
Well, the evidence doesn't support that. I mean, I've heard that argument, as you say, back when Reagan talked about trickle, but it hasn't happened. I mean, we don't have to guess about that or give you an opinion. The fact is, it doesn't happen.
Isn't trickle down supposed to put more wealth into the hands of the lower income workers? Because the idea being, if we give more money to the wealthy people, they're going to spend it, and it ends up in the hands of the lower income segment of the population. Except the part that's ignored in that concept is that when wealthy people get money, they don't just go out and spend it all, because if they did, they wouldn't be wealthy.
Right. So a great example would be Jeff Bezos. He's the second richest guy on the planet, maybe. He got a huge tax cut, right? Personally. And so if you follow the theory that he's a job creator, why did he fire, half of the people at the Washington Post?
Yeah.
He would have kept them on if he was really spending the money to create jobs. He's not doing that. He's taking it and he's spending it for himself. So.
And there's a human nature problem here with greed. People who are at that level or anywhere near that level, they have no desire to stop making money and stop. There's nothing in their mind that says, I'm going to now stop making more profit. There has to be a check on that to some degree. And most of this money, by the way, is passive income. It's not they're out there, mowing yards. This is passive income, often generated by legislation that favors them. I mean, Trump went to these oil people before this last election and said, elect me and I will take care of you. He's beholden to these people. This is like bribery. And he doesn't care about the lower class. And he still brags about how this tariff policy has brought in more money. It's from the poor people who are paying more tax. This isn't from other countries. He continues to talk about this money coming from other countries. It's coming from the poor who are paying the higher taxes for sales transactions. He doesn't seem to get that.
He also doesn't seem to get that the oil companies really made out, for their $1 billion investment in his campaign. They never in their wildest dreams thought that he would go to war with Iran and really just set the table for them to make more profit than they could ever dream of making in a regular economy.
And you talked about lobbyists. Lobbyists for tariff exemptions is now the biggest portion of lobbyists in Washington. It's expanded sixfold. So what that means is if somebody wants a tariff lifted on something and they hire a lobbyist, he's going to go into the White House and say, our boss just bought $10 million worth of crypto. What do you think you can do about the tariff on the raw materials that we need for our product? And of course, Trump's going to say, let's see, you say you bought 10 million in crypto. Well, of course, we're going to buy another 10 million tomorrow. Okay, we'll lift that tariff for you. Right?
Well, Apple,
it's just pure corruption.
Cook went to the White House and gave him $1 million for the ballroom. And as a result, Apple got all kinds of exemptions from the tariffs that have saved his company billions of dollars. That's just, completely, number one, a horrible deal for us, for the government, because we missed out on all of that tax that could have come in. But, he's just a bad businessman because he got $1 million for something that he really cares about and some sort of gold bobble that he could put on his desk.
And didn't he put up all the jack for the movie?
No, that was Bezos.
Oh, okay.
40 million for Melania movie.
Yeah, that was a.
By the way, federal judge has shut down that ballroom. It's all these wonderful things that he does. He got shut down and the stopping funding for the public broadcasting and radio. All these things he's done, the courts are coming and saying you can't do this, and he just whines and whines about it.
Yeah, turns out we have laws that and approvals that you have to get to do the various things that he just does without getting any approval because he doesn't think he needs to.
And here's another level of corruption that people don't really talk about. There are now these future betting. Gambling is. We just spent a whole show about I think how the gambling problem is getting worse with all this online betting. But there's now futures markets for anything you can bet on. And so, and we've talked about this a little bit, people know about this information. If you knew what Trump was going to do in terms of the war in Iran, people are making money off that, which is pretty much insider trading. And really no one's talking about that.
And those prediction markets are completely unregulated at this point. They should be regulated like the stock exchange is so that you can be charged for insider trading on these things. And they're not. And Trump and all of his friends are probably sharing that information with family members and others so that they can make lots of money.
Well, her fourth core value listed is equality of opportunity. Does the Republican Party represent that? Equality of opportunity.
Well, as long as you're in our
Sounds
cult,
great.
if you believe, drink our Kool-Aid and believe everything we say, you can't have any dissent. There's no respect at all for this concept that there are people that might need to be helped because they weren't given the benefits that other people were given, and maybe we might want to help those people who were born into difficult situations. Oh no, we can't. That's we can't even use that word in the state of Florida. Don't even reference that anymore. The diversity.
Everywhere you turn, when there's a Republican legislature or the Republicans on the Supreme Court, they're taking away rights. When is the last time that happened in our country? We're seeing a clawback of rights that we previously had. So
let's look back.
How that's equality of opportunity.
Roughly 100 years, which doesn't seem like that long a time when we reach our 70s, and look at what working conditions were in this country. Social Security was still roughly 10 years away from even being passed. Workers that typically came across the Atlantic from Central or Western Europe and immigrated into the country took jobs in steel mills or sweatshops or garment industries, working 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, and then another 8 hours on Saturday, roughly 70-hour work weeks to make enough money to spend their lives in a tenement slum where they had no health insurance, they had no retirement programs, they had no job security. If somebody got injured on the job, they just lost their income. And of course, it was the Republicans that made life better for us, wasn't it, Gary?
Well, some of those workers were 10 and 12 years old too,
Child labor.
We finally said, you know what, we need to have kids in school and not in factories. And so, again, that was a Democratic.
Well, Governor Huckabee is getting that straightened out in Arkansas. She's re-implemented child labor laws.
Oh, and they're doing that here in Florida so that you can, work at night even if you're in high school. Yeah.
But Social Security came along from the Democrats, strongly opposed by the Republicans, and it was probably pretty much like the Affordable Care Act. They were constantly trying to repeal it, and then that evolved into trying to privatize it, but somehow get it so that some corporation can make money off it, or some bank. The child labor laws came about because of Democrats. The 40-hour work week with time and a half came about, minimum wage. Unions were busted back 100 years ago. If they went on strike, the companies would just hire goons, Pinkerton goons, right, to go in there and bust the heads of the union organizers who were trying to get better working conditions or better pay or both for their workers. They just didn't tolerate that. Workers were to be oppressed in this country, and the Republicans resisted all the efforts that not only made life better for the working class, but built a middle class that then exceeded something like 63% of the population by the end of the Second World War, where people could have leisure time. They had excess income. They were able to afford a home and a car, and all that on a single income, right? Good public education for their kids. All of that came about from the Democrats.
Robert Caro has written a number of books on Lyndon Johnson. Excellent books. And one of the most fascinating aspects of Lyndon Johnson was in the 60s when a lot of this was happening, was going to these Republicans, you're right, certainly were opposing all of this, but secondarily for Johnson was going to these other very conservative Southern Democratic senators and convincing them that there was a reason to pursue civil rights. There's a reason to expand voting. There's a reason to have Social Security. There's a reason to avoid poverty. People in this generation, I don't think understand the level of poverty that existed with the elderly when there was not Social Security, and they did not have any 401ks. And
they didn't have running water or solid floors. Dolly Parton, as I understand it, was born in a house with a dirt floor and no running water, much less electricity. And she's still alive and working. And then she experienced that in her lifetime.
And these politicians said, we're not going to accept this level of existence, and we're going to give people opportunities to get out of that situation if they're younger. But as older, there's a dignity. We're not going to have you die in poverty where you have no health care, no running water. And there's a level that we think you're entitled to in this country. And that's what drove this legislation. And that's what's being attacked right now.
Go ahead.
Yeah, my uncle, when he was in Congress, he said many times around the kitchen table that when he was growing up in the Depression, most of the poor people in this country were elderly. They weren't working anymore. They didn't have any income. They didn't have any health care. And as a result, they were just subsisting in a horrible situation. He said, none of that should happen in this country. We should have, health care for elderly people. We really should have it for everybody. But, all of those things were driven by the economic conditions, but the Republicans still are attacking unions. There was a bill passed in the Florida legislature this session that attacks unions, making you have to not have they measure the number of people allowed to vote in an election for a union, and you have to have more than 50% of the people allowed to vote, not just the number of people that vote in the election like we have in our regular elections. You count the number of votes of the people that showed up, not the people that could have voted to determine who the winner is.
Yeah.
And that's what they're doing to tear down unions in Florida. And it's all to promote big business. and they stopped at the federal level enforcing any kind of antitrust laws, again, to allow these corporations to grow and merge and stifle all competition. None of that helps workers. They always lay people off after a merger, because we don't need two comptrollers. We have one for the company, and we took over another company. Okay, you don't get a job anymore, and that's what people on the right that are voting for this stuff don't seem to get, that these corporations are not your friend. These rich people are not creating jobs for anybody. They're creating wealth for themselves.
Well, and they've gutted these pension programs. And where in the past you would at least have this perception that you'd have this secure pension. That's all been gutted. It's pretty much you're on your own with private, investment, which you have no money to invest. So you're living pretty much on Social Security. But you mentioned middle class. That's the bottom line. The middle class in this country is clearly decreasing. And by definition, you're destabilizing this country when you decrease the middle class.
Mm-hmm. And with more wealth going to the top 1%, we're seeing a greater disparity of wealth than we had during the era of the robber barons 100 years ago, which is just unbelievable. When we see how those people lived, the austerity that they surrounded themselves with, and the control they had over the economy and the stock markets. And it's just unbelievable that we are actually, to a greater extent, separating the wealth from the working class people in this country.
And there's a cruelty to it. It's like it's a dehumanizing. I don't want to hear about. There are people suffering out there badly right now, and that we've talked about. Medicaid being cut, these hospitals shutting down, these nursing homes shutting down. There's an inherent cruelty that we don't really give a damn. It's not our problem. It is not our problem.
And with the basically no controls on spending in elections, you have these billionaires who are controlling the outcome of elections, and then they are essentially bribing the people that are in office to do their bidding for them. And so nothing ever happens that they don't want to happen.
Well, then how did the Democratic Party get this label of high taxing and high spending in government?
Because if you control the media landscape, which the Republicans have been very successful in doing since probably the mid 90s, they control all of the talk radio, and Fox News came along in the mid 90s, and all of that, they started repeating this mantra all over the country, over and over and over. And if you say it long enough, people will believe it, whether it's true or not.
Well, the war on poverty, which was started back in the 60s, one of the big Republican talking points has been all this money we spent on the war on poverty, which, God bless, at least we cared enough to say we want to try and solve this issue of poverty in this country. And there's a reason to do it. And they came back, we spent all this money and it's only gotten worse. So that's, I think, part of the mantra is that we've wasted all this money to try and solve a problem that we haven't solved it by just throwing money at it.
Yeah, and in any government program, there's going to be fraud, but that's why we hire inspectors general until the Republicans come along and fire them all. So isn't that sort of sending up the signal that, if you're white collar and you want to engage in fraud, there's nobody to investigate you anymore. So have at it. And even if you get caught and convicted, even if you've imported 400 tons of cocaine into this country, you can buy a pardon.
And I do think we have, I think that I would hope most of us, I think at least around this table, believe that our society does have an obligation to provide education and healthcare and help these children who have no parents per se, maybe are in these horrible foster care situations. I saw this when I was a circuit judge in the dependency courts. These children just born in these situations that you can't even imagine. Drug abuse, father's not around, but I would hope that most of us would assume in this country that we have an obligation as a society to try and help those situations, and not just, well, that's not our problem. Just put them in jail.
Right. Well, any criticisms you have of the Democratic Party, Gary, because what we're hearing is it is leaderless right now. Which I don't know why you need a particular specific leader of the party. That's what primaries are for. The consensus is that the governor of California, Newsom, may make a run for it, and the nation tends to look at California and say that state is a failure. It's overtaxed. It's overregulated. We don't want that unleashed on the rest of the country. What do you have to say about all of that?
Well, I think, the Republicans have done a much better job of messaging, and Democrats are having trouble finding their voice, and they're not as strong as people would like to see them be. So that's my criticism, and I'd like to see them get tougher. And so, I think that's happening, but I think part of it needs to be, we need to get rid of some of the people that are in leadership, like Chuck Schumer. He's horrible.
Wow.
And bring in some younger folks that I think. I love Alyssa Slotkin, for example. She's tough as nails and speaks, truth to power and doesn't back down from anybody. Former CIA person. I think, we need more of that. So
I think you've got some very strong governors. You've got Andy Beshear in Kentucky, who, as a Democrat and as Attorney General of Kentucky, has been very popular in a Republican state per se. You've got Tallarico is the Senate candidate in Texas, who I think, if he could win that race, is a young, dynamic, ethical speaker. And people badmouth Gavin Newsom. He had the guts to come out. And Republicans who minimize Gavin Newsom because he's from liberal California do that at their own risk. I think Newsom has been very strong. You've got the governors of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. So I think a lot of the new Democratic world needs to come out of these governors' houses.
Yeah. And do you think that if the Democrats could take full power now, White House and both houses of Congress, they could actually pass legislation that would affect affordability for this country?
Yeah, I think they could.
Yeah.
But they'd have to raise some taxes to do it, because we can't put more on the national debt. We just simply can't. I'd never thought that I would agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene, but she put a post up last night after the president spoke, and she said, "I wanted so much for President Trump to put America first. That's what I believed he would do. All I heard from his speech tonight was war, war, war. Nothing to lower the cost of living for Americans, nothing to reduce our nearly $40 trillion in debt, nothing to save Social Security, which goes bankrupt in just a few years, nothing to lower the cost of insurance, nothing to address jobs for Americans, nothing about education for our children, nothing about our children's future, nothing for America's future. I'm so beyond done." And she goes on to pray for the military. But, that's exactly the point, that the Republicans have done nothing. Tell me one thing that they passed in Congress other than that horrible bill that they passed that overfunded ICE and overfunded billionaires.
Yeah.
Well, there's no effort. There's no effort made at all for any bipartisan attempts to resolve these very difficult issues. They're just completely ignored.
And we're going to see how it has affected some of the attendees at the CPAC conference after we take a short break here on The Voice of Reason. Ed Golly with Gary Gibbons and Kevin Carey. We're going to talk about that, some other issues when we return. Our rant from, again, Liz Oyer, who's going to weigh in on some of the, I can't remember what. We'll find out. We'll just have to listen to it. That and more of the issues the conservatives never want you to hear about.
Hey everyone, it is Brandy Joy with the Brandy Joy Joyride. Feel free to hop in and have a good time with us every Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. This show is brought to you by One Unit, dedicated to bringing people together, letting your voices be heard, and of course, we're here to entertain you, upbuild you, inspire you, and even hear from you. So every Thursday, tune in to 106.1 FM, Brandy Joy Joyride, and we will hear from you and let's have some fun.
You're listening to the Voice of Reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network. The following is a customer review of Dimmitt Chevrolet Clearwater.
Dimmitt Chevrolet Clearwater has been in business for over 100 years. That means they've had over a century to refine the art of scamming their customers. And boy, have they mastered the craft. When I went to Dimmitt to buy a used EV, the first con they ran on me was to tell me I had 3 days to back out of any deal I made. Turned out to be a total lie. Second con was to push me into financing the car when I wanted to pay cash. That way they could sell the loan and make more money on me. Because they didn't see me as a customer to whom they would sell a car at a fair price and treat honestly, they saw me as a mark they could grift to the fullest. They even stole my $4,000 federal tax rebate. It's amazing they didn't find a way to steal the car back from me after they sold it to me. Dimmitt screwed me every way, including up and down, because I had mistakenly assumed Dimmitt Chevrolet Clearwater was a reputable business. So remember, if you shop Dimmitt, you'll say, damn it.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
Okay, Voice of Reason back in business here. It's time for Poll Watch. I'm going to flip this over to Gary for some CNN poll numbers.
Yeah, it turns out, guess what? President's approval rating for handling of the economy has fallen to a new career low of 31%,
Whoa.
according to a new CNN poll conducted by SSRS.
That makes former President Biden look about as popular as Mickey Mouse.
It reflects a growing pessimism among Americans over the issue they consistently describe as the most important. Roughly 2/3 of Americans say Trump's policies have worsened economic conditions in the U.S., up 10% since January. Just 27% say they approve of Trump's handling of inflation, down from 44% 1 year ago. And his overall approval rating has held relatively steady at 35%, 1 point off of his all-time low in CNN polling. There's been a notable erosion, however, in his standing with his own partisans. The share of Republicans who strongly approve of his job performance has dropped to 43% from 52% in January. Wow. And his overall economic approval rating is down 8 points since January and larger 14 points among Republicans. So, people are feeling it. He said last night, "Oh, we're doing great. Our economy is fine. We can handle all of this."
He said there's no inflation.
Yeah,
we know that's not true.
It's like 4.2% now, and it's going up. Yeah, the price of oil they announced on the news at the break has gone up 13%. Just since his speech last night, nobody's believing it. When you ride down the street and you see them changing the numbers on the sign at the gas station in front of your eyes, and they're going up $1 in a month, it's
well, literally what's happened is people cannot afford to fill their tank up. They go in there and they say, well, I can afford, $10. $10 is what, 2 gallons of gas. But what happened in 2024 is there was an agreement made. It was below 50%. Trump seems to suggest it, but it was still below the 50%. But the public apparently they knew Trump. They knew what a bad person he was. They knew that he was a clown. But they seemed to think they could get through that and say, we believe that before the pandemic, the economy was better than what they perceived with what was happening with Biden, with the inflation, and that what Harris was selling in the fall of 2024. But it hasn't happened. So when you come in knowing we don't like this person, but we believe, and he sold us this bill of better economic times and cutting inflation. And then when it's not happening, and he's ignoring the fact it's not happening, the term political science is a term for a reason. The science of that is nothing but this would happen. You fully could expect these poll numbers, and they're going to get worse. There's talk about it getting down into the high 20s.
And you can trace the decline of the economy right back to the so-called Liberation Day. Mm-hmm. And when he announced all those tariffs, worldwide tariffs, it's the stupidest thing ever. It's illegal. We're now supposed to get the money back, but it's caused everything to go up in price, and people are starting to realize that now. Even on the other side of the aisle, they're starting to realize that this was inflationary, and now you compound that with this war that was taken, a knee-jerk reaction, heavy emphasis on the jerk part. But
well, think about if you had we all had tests in school. This is multiple choice test. What should we do now with all these problems? And one of the A, B, C, D. One was, let's start this war unprovoked in Iran, and let's spend over $1 billion a day. Let's continue to increase the deficit. Let's create a global crisis where the oil prices are skyrocketing. This is the last thing you should have done, was start this war. And I think it goes back to what you said, Ed, about it being just a distraction, which is complete cynicism to say, I'm going to subject this country to the worst of all worlds so they can forget about my corruption.
That, and an economic plan cannot be structured on daily whims. It needs to be laid out and established and adhered to in order to have an effect. And since Trump does everything on the spur of the moment, his economic plan and his tariff plans turn into just chaos, which is why we're not getting results from them.
What do these Republicans think is going to happen in November? I know we keep harping on
they
this.
know darn good and well what's going to.
They know
Yeah.
the bullet's coming right at their head. There's no question about that.
yeah, there's so many that are deciding not to run again, and that's telling.
And we're going to look into some of the events at the CPAC from last weekend after we hear from our rant for this week. We're in former pardon attorney for the Department of Justice, Liz Oyer, rags on the Attorney General and her Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche.
Pam Bondi went on television and stated that in America, citizenship is not a right, it's a privilege. Here's her exact quote: "Being a citizen in our country is a privilege, it's not a right." Well, actually, the Constitution says it's a right. It's in the 14th Amendment. It's quite embarrassing that our Attorney General either lacks basic knowledge of the Constitution or is choosing to ignore it, because being the Attorney General is actually a privilege, not a right. Bondi suggested that citizenship should be limited to those who, quote, deserve to be here. If only that were true. Meanwhile, Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General, spoke at a conference for conservatives called CPAC, where he did not even bother to hide the fact that he is bloodthirsty for revenge against Donald Trump's enemies, and he is using his official position to get it. Blanche boasted that he has now fired every single person in the DOJ who had any role whatsoever in investigating Donald Trump. This includes hundreds of people, most of whom were low-level staffers simply doing the work assigned to them by their bosses. This type of political retaliation is actually illegal, but Blanche claims that everyone at DOJ works for Donald Trump and therefore he's free to fire them at will. Blanche also said that everyone in the Trump administration is afraid that if they don't win the next election, we're all going to be investigated and indicted. That's a quote. I guess it's stating the obvious to suggest that maybe if they just followed the law, they wouldn't have to worry about that. The Justice Department also announced last week that they're going to pay over $1 million to Michael Flynn, who was Trump's national security advisor in his first term. Flynn had to resign after it was shown that he had unauthorized communications with Russia and then lied to the FBI about it. Flynn pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI, which is a crime, but Trump pardoned him. Then Flynn sued DOJ for wrongful prosecution. A court threw out his lawsuit, but Flynn sued again after Donald Trump was reelected, and now DOJ has decided to pay him with taxpayer dollars. So we can be sure that other Trump allies are lining up to get paid for their frivolous grievances out of our pockets. It has become increasingly clear that DOJ is under the thumb of people who have no regard for the law and no intention of following it. The only silver lining is that the corruption and abuse is right on the surface where we can all see it, which will make it easier to hold them accountable.
And the crook in front of the line is Crooked Donald himself, who sued the IRS for $10 billion because a contract employee leaked 2 pages of his tax return that he insisted he would release upon completion of the audit that he was under, 12 years ago? Audits don't take that long. Gosh, and they'll probably pay him off. That's the worst part.
Ed, I had a class in law school where you didn't have to show up and you just gave, you didn't take a test, you gave your grade in. It's kind of like what's happening with, and then the next semester, everyone took it and they changed it. And you had to actually take the test. It's just like Trump saying, I want billions of dollars and I'm going to go to the DOJ, who I control, who's going to settle this case. We're never going to have to go to court and worry about judges or juries. they're going to settle the case. I control this entity, and basically, like you said a little bit with Flynn last week, Gary. Here's my receipt. I just write the check for whatever amount I want. So he's got the DOJ paying like they did Flynn, which was absurd. The 1.2 million last week, going to Trump saying even more. I want more than this, and they're probably going to pay him some amount for his criminal conduct.
Yeah, they're using it as a vehicle to facilitate the corruption. But we were settling a lawsuit, so we had to pay him. No, take it to trial. Let a jury determine whether he can actually prove entitlement to the damages that he was claiming. No, as soon as it was filed, they didn't even wait for the answer period to expire before they settled with him.
Oh, that was that. The fact that Flynn got a dime when he's lucky he's not in prison right now. He was pardoned for felony, admitted he committed, he didn't go to trial. He pled guilty to felony charges.
I was arguing with a conservative person on Facebook this week about the Flynn payment situation, and he said that he was tricked into pleading guilty. Are you kidding me? That just doesn't happen. You aren't tricked into pleading guilty. And then Bill Barr came in and said, "Oh, well, I'm a fixer for several presidents. I'll make this go away, and we'll just dismiss the case."
And by the way,
and then we'll pardon him.
When the judge takes a guilty plea, there's a whole colloquy that a judge has to do, and I'm sure happened here with the federal judge with Flynn, where they go through, and it's very tedious to make sure the judge doesn't just rubber stamp anything. Has to be assured that this was a free and voluntary agreement of guilt.
Yeah. Are you pleading guilty because you are guilty? Yes.
And the evidence.
That's the question that's asked.
Yeah. And the prosecutor makes it clear that the evidence is indisputable, right? So you'd better go ahead and try to plea into a better deal than you might get if you go before a jury and get convicted and end up with a worse sentence. And Trump usually the way it goes.
Trump has turned the Treasury into a personal ATM machine.
Yeah,
that's what he's done. Just whatever. There's no limit as to what they're going to get from our money. This is not, this is public money.
And yet they still like him and trust that he attacked Iran for a good reason. But the conservative activists who met in Grapevine, Texas at the Conservative Political Action Committee conference last week worry about the chaos that war may unleash. I thought it'd be fun to look at a few highlights. One of MAGA world's best-known personalities cautioned that the war may just be in its beginning phase. That would be your basic Steve Bannon. You remember he was actually senior White House official in Crooked Donald's first term, and he told the conference audience, quote, "Your sons, daughters, granddaughters, grandsons could be on Karg Island and holding a beachhead on the Strait of Hormuz," unquote. He said people who need to have Trump's back, but should decide for themselves that the war is worth fighting. Now, you know who Angela Paxton is, right? She's a Republican state senator in Texas. That name may sound familiar because she's the wife of Ken Paxton, who's the attorney general running for the Senate seat now. And he's committed enough crime to be taken seriously by the Republican Party. She said when she filled up her truck last time, it cost about $70. Normally the price is in the 50s to 60s. So being interviewed, she says this, quote, "Listen, in Texas, we don't like high gas prices, do we?" Unquote. Last year, she filed for divorce against her husband because, well, it doesn't go into why, but we can pretty much imagine why. And she said this also: most people can tolerate something for a short period of time when they feel like this is not forever and is for a higher purpose. As long as that is how it is perceived, then I think people will stay in a supportive posture toward the war. Well, that was kind of the message from Trump's talk or his address to America this week, was that, this is only temporary. And when it's over, within a couple of weeks, gas prices are just going to plummet down below where they were before it all started.
Short-term pain, long-term gain is what they all repeat. That was the talking point, and I saw clips of all these Republicans going on all the talk shows and radio, and they all said those same words. And the real question is, it's not true. It's not going to be short term, because Iran has decided that they're going to retaliate by blowing up the oil fields of the neighboring countries and closing the straits with no end in sight. So none of those prices are going to come down. It's going to affect everything.
Yeah.
Shipping, how much is diesel now? $5.50, $6 a gallon. That's going to affect the price of everything that because all of those goods are shipped by truck around the country.
Airline
By the way,
prices.
I saw
slated to go
pictures
up.
of the CPAC. A lot of those sessions were virtually empty. It was nowhere near the crowds. They know there's a problem here. There's a serious problem.
The leader
here.
of it came out and said, if the Democrats get in, they're going to be impeachments. We don't want impeachments. And everybody cheered for an impeachment. And he goes, wait, that isn't right. Let's try that again. And they cheered even louder. So I think there's some young people that are going to CPAC now that believed and voted for him because he said he wouldn't get into any wars. And this has really been a break.
One number that's cratered for Trump is the young vote. He got a pretty high percentage of the young vote, and it's cratered. The numbers are just virtually nothing.
Because they're all registered for the draft.
And the independent vote, of course, he's really tanking there because, again, a lot of those people believed, he's a brilliant businessman. He'll straighten everything out. We're going to have low inflation, high employment, high wages. And they're seeing that, no, that not only is it not happening, but now we can see it's not going to happen. And so they are the main voting bloc that ends up deciding who wins these elections.
Well, Trump may not care, but he's going to be living a living hell if the Congress goes Democrat. There's going to be 2 years of investigations and possibly also impeachments.
Todd Blanche was there. He was formerly Trump's criminal attorney, and he stood at CPAC and asked with feigned innocence why anyone would object to armed masked goons menacing people by standing outside polling places, just like in the 1920s and the 1880s in the Deep South. I mean, he's telling us that voter intimidation is going to be implemented.
It's the Ku Klux Klan playbook. That's what they did in the South for years.
Mm-hmm.
And so bad that the Republican Party for many years is under a consent order agreeing not to have people show up in military garb and drive, big Humvees around the polling places. It was here until a couple of years ago. That order finally expired. So.
Well, what's happening, and we can talk about this maybe another day, that there, as I've mentioned before, there are over 60 lawsuits right now that will continue regarding the voter suppression issues around the country. And it's going to be a state-by-state issue.
And as for Florida being a free state, without any public fanfare, our governor signed a bill on Friday that will help a billionaire mega donor build a water park in Miami Beach, despite intense opposition from the neighbors that live nearby. So this provision was tucked inside a larger piece of land use legislation. It's a favor for the famed Fontainebleau Hotel and owner Jeffrey Soffer, who's a South Florida real estate mogul who once donated 1 million balloons to the Ron DeSantis failed presidential campaign, and who has repeatedly let Florida's jet-set governor fly around on his private plane. And so no celebrity bill signing or no conference. It's done on Friday night so that the media doesn't pick up on it, and it kind of gets buried. A classic, what they call a Friday news dump. But it just shows, again, the Republican Party has no concern for what the people want, only what the mega donors and the uber rich want.
And preemption of everything that was local control, because everybody in Miami Beach was against that. The local government was against it. They were not going to approve the zoning for this thing. There's not enough parking. If you've ever been down there to Miami Beach, it's a nightmare. And yet this guy wanted to build this thing. And so they said, well, we can fix that in Tallahassee. It's one-stop shopping and we can preempt anything.
Yeah.
So if you like local control and you want to control what's going on in your neighborhood, don't move to Florida.
And Kevin, do you think DeSantis is going to make another bid for the presidency?
He may, but it's going to be, I mean, it will be a joke. He's not going to, he has no future in
You think
national
he'll strike
politics.
out the same way he did?
Well,
Horrible politician.
What's embarrassing, and he flailed out in Iowa, which was the first state, and he's talked recently about the fact that, well, that was just because Trump was there, and but for Trump I would have won.
Time for our quote of the day. This is from Helen Fielding, quoted in the Paris Review. She says, "Happy endings are just about a question of the place where you choose to stop the story." So that wraps up another edition of The Voice of Reason. We'll be back again next Thursday morning at 9 o'clock for another edition. I want to thank my co-hosts today, Gary Gibbons and Kevin Carey. I'm Ed Golly, and I want to remind all our listeners the same thing we always do. If the statement seems a little bit too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because a conservative said it.
Make them prove it.
WTAN Clearwater
FM 106.1